It's now time to hear from our founder, Harold Goodwin. Harold, as I think most of you know, is Emeritus Professor and Responsible Tourism Director at the Institute of Place Management at Manchester Metropolitan University. But he's also keen that people understand that his background is in adult and continuing education. He drafted the 2002 Cape Town Declaration on Responsible Tourism and wrote the 2022 Responsible Charter, which was signed and launched on Magna Carta Island. As Managing Director of the Responsible Tourism Partnership, he's worked on 4 continents with local communities, their governments, and the inbound and outbound tourism industry. And in 2023, he was recognised in the Global Hall of Fame Academy as the founder of the Responsible Tourism Movement. Harold Goodwin.
Thank you, Debbie. No wonder I feel tired. Thanks, all of you, for coming. What will interest those of you who know me of old is that I only know about a third of the people in the room, which is one indicator of the speed at which the movement is growing. I've been given 10 minutes, and at the time when I was given 10 minutes, I was quite happy. Then I started to think about the history of responsible tourism and realised that I'd bitten off a lot in 10 minutes. But here we go. I am going to re-record this afterwards with a longer presentation, so don't worry too much about the slides. I wanted to start by talking about the UK situation. It started actually with VSO, who incredibly thought it would be a good idea to start advocacy campaigns, and they asked people in villages around the world what the big issue was, and it was tourism. Had they done that a year later, it would have been HIV and AIDS. So here we go with the first happenstance that made a difference. They asked me to look at the possibility of creating ethical tourism and suggested that I work with ATO, which is where I met Richard Hearn, who is here somewhere. Richard and I decided that there was no way tour operators were ever going to be ethical. Too big a broader an agenda, and whatever you do, somebody's going to claim that what you're doing isn't. Then we moved on and we had responsible tourism guidelines from ATO. Then in 2001, Mr. Blair, currently then the Prime Minister, decided to take a sustainable tourism initiative to WSSD and managed to involve the big 4 companies. Not sure that that actually led to very much, but nonetheless, it happened. That was the Sustainable Tourism Initiative, and the Travel Foundation partly grew out of that. Then South Africa, 1996, post-apartheid. Their white paper talked about responsible tourism as being fundamental. They said responsible tourism is not a luxury for South Africa, but an absolute necessity for countries to build a successful and sustainable industry. I was still young then, in fact I was 50, and I had the brass neck to get on a plane to go out to South Africa and suggest that we might be able to help them with their responsible tourism guidelines. And incredibly they said yes, so long as the first event was held in a shebeen, in a pub. They didn't remember that I was English and I like pubs, so that was hardly a penalty. The 2000 Cape Town Declaration was a result of that. It was held as a side event of the World Summit on Sustainable Development. And one of the great things about us having moved on is that I have at last been able to get rid of that last but one comment there about providing access for physically challenged people. In my defence, that was written on the hoof in front of the whole conference, which was going through this declaration line by line. I'm still embarrassed by the fact that I ever wrote that. However, it's also important to recognise that there is nothing new under the sun. As Martin has already pointed out, Jos Krippendorf is the most obvious originator of all of this. Most famously in '87, in The Holidaymakers, he called for rebellious tourists and rebellious locals, and my goodness, we need both on a big scale. So, what can we say responsible tourism is? It's clearly triple bottom line. I get frustrated by the focus on environment, but clearly environment is the most existential threat that we now face. It's a way of travelling. It's diverse. It is different in every place, and I've had the luxury of working in a lot of different places. But what I would say it has in common is that it is becoming a movement, and it is characterised by transparency. I'm driven crazy still by people talking about ecotourism as though it's of any significance at all. The original research that I did that got me back to working in universities demonstrated that you can't find ecotourism on the ground at the national park level. That isn't to say there aren't a few good companies, but it's mostly just marketing hype. Now, the reality is that when people don't accept responsibility and the willingness to take action, we get irresponsible tourism, and then comes over-tourism. And actually, we did kind of worry about that already in 2002 in the Cape Town Declaration. So responsible tourism is what we do to make tourism more sustainable. It's what drives sustainability. And it seems to me that the thing we have to hold on to in all of this, and particularly if you're talking to a politician, the question you have to ask is, do we want to use tourism for the sustainable development of this community and this destination? Or do you want to allow yourself to be used by tourism and the assets stripped out? Krippendorf was brave enough to talk about tourism as an extractive industry. I was at a conference in Edinburgh last week, and actually somebody used the same word. It's almost gone out of fashion to admit that tourism is ultimately an extractive industry. So responsible tourism requires us to say what we're doing to make tourism better and be transparent about what we do and critically what we achieve. It is no longer enough just to mouth the words, because the failure to take responsibility results in this. Now, does the word matter? I think it probably does, except that there are lots of different ways in which you can be responsible. But the important thing about responsible is it's a doing word, whereas sustainable describes an end state. And I've lost count of the number of businesses I've spoken to who said they think it's sustainable because they'll still be doing it next year. They obviously don't have children or grandchildren. All forms of tourism can be more responsible. The evidence is in the results. So if you want to talk about regenerative tourism, fine, go ahead. Demonstrate you're doing it. Regenerative tourism is as old as the hills. So it started with regenerating declining urban areas and reusing buildings. There's nothing new about this. I see it's flavour of the month at WTM this year. Who knows what it will be next year. So, moving on. The Responsible Tourism Awards, and I'm proud of this. I can't believe I'm still doing it after 21 years. But there we go. I haven't learned anything, really. It's evidence-based. It has to be replicable, has to be innovative, and it has to have the potential for influence, or else it's not going to win an award. Then we talk about how is it going mainstream. And Matt, if I could just say publicly, I'm really excited to be working with EasyJet. And how we've managed to get all this way through the day without you mentioning hydrogen is beyond me, but we perhaps won't go there. I'm very excited by hydrogen in aviation. I believe it's going to happen. And so do a lot of young female engineers who were on a panel at World Travel Market last year saying it. So how do we go mainstream? Well, I must acknowledge the role that WTM played in this. Environment Awareness Day in 1994, 2001, Responsible Travel, founded with Justin Francis, the UK Government's Sustainable Tourism Initiative, the Travel Foundation launched in 2003, and Justin brilliantly took the opportunity of the end of the Tourism Tomorrow Awards and founded the Responsible Tourism Awards, launched at WTM in 2004, and very kindly asked me to chair the panel of judges for that. I don't think either of us expected that it would still be going 20 years later, but it is. WTM World Responsible Tourism Day followed in 2007, and I want to just acknowledge the role of people here who are largely out of the game now, but Simon Greenberry, Jane Larkham, Fiona Jeffrey, Simon Press all played important roles in expanding that programme at WTM. And then Arabian Travel Market in 2011, and then Africa in 2014. But, particularly with Adama in the room, I want to just acknowledge our biggest seminal failure Adama. Not your fault, I don't think, not my fault. Certainly it's not my fault. Out of Rio came the CSD7, and the UN finally, 5 years later, looked at tourism and poverty reduction. And I met Adama in 1999 at the UN. We'd formed the Pro-Poor Tourism Partnership. We ran then, and Martin was involved in this as well, a market access initiative in the Gambia. It ran for 18 months, and we worked out exactly what needed to be done to open up market access for the informal sector in the Gambia. Guess what? Nothing happened. We had an 18-month project. We wrote a report. DFID were pleased, but nothing happened. So, India. Now, India is really exciting because it's the best evidence I've got of replication working. A man called Dr. Venu, who was then Secretary of Tourism, subsequently retired, asked me to help run a conference on responsible tourism in destinations in Kerala to learn from around the world. Rupesh Kumar ran the only successful experiment which followed those four, that conference. And he took two ideas from Africa. He took the notion of township tours from South Africa, and he took producer cooperatives through Adama from the Gambia. And out of that, he created a very successful model for responsible tourism in Kumarakoram. I then sit down opposite the Minister for Tourism in Kerala, and he says, that's a nice idea, prove it works. So we had to do a household census in Kerala, and we proved that it works. As a result of that, we get the Responsible Tourism Mission, and it's been rolled out across the whole of Kerala. But more exciting even than that, and that is pretty exciting, but more exciting even than that is it's now being taken up in Hindu BJP states across India, and looks as though it's mainstreaming to become a big part of the Indian national policy. Replication works. But to make replication work, you have to demonstrate that what you're doing has actually made a difference. It's no good just mouthing the words, and that's why the evidence matters. Now, just really quickly now, because I know I'm running out of time, the 2022 Charter argues that responsibility drives sustainability, and it's about making better places for people to live in, better places for people to visit. Be amazed how many people get that the wrong way round. It's a kind of litmus test for whether people have really understood. It recognises diversity. And we need to explain why we're picking up on particular issues, because the issues that matter vary from place to place. On the other hand, greenhouse gas emissions, plastic waste and biodiversity extinction are a problem everywhere. I was being told earlier that we didn't recognise the importance of the social dimension. I won't name the person who said that. But actually, it very clearly says greater economic benefits for local people, enhancing the well-being of host communities, providing better employment conditions, developing shared value with local businesses. I could go on. But we have not ignored the socio-economic agenda. We talk about it involving local people in decisions, and that happens in a few places. It's happened in Barcelona, it happens in Kerala, it may be about to happen in Edinburgh, but it remains rare, sadly. I'd be delighted if people know of other places where it's happening, because I'd like to get that written up. We talk about it making a positive contribution to the conservation of natural and cultural resources, being nature positive, and Justin has done a lot of work on that when he became chair of Responsible Travel. And it talks about inclusive employment for the differently able and people of diverse ethnicities, gender and sexual orientations. And it talks about the benefits to guests in terms of more enjoyable experiences and being culturally sensitive. Tim, you didn't say, sorry, I've lost where you are, but Tim didn't say what Justin always says to me. He says, people come to Responsible Travel, they find a fantastic holiday, they have a great time, and they come back because they're expecting to find another great holiday. And I think that's a big part of why you get such a high level of repeat business, and it demonstrates why people go back to particular destinations with particular operators. I think it's a big part of why it works. And finally, it's a call for action, recognising that sustainability is a journey, that we need to focus on particular issues and what we're doing to address them, and recognise that we need to be transparent and honest about what we achieve. So, it's a broad-based movement. Martin challenged me to try and say how many people were involved. And in the end, Martin, I decided I wasn't quite sure what criteria you wanted me to use, so I used the academics way out. But it's 21 years of Responsible Tourism Awards. I don't know, 400 entries? 400 winners, probably. Hundreds more entries. A Masters in Responsible Tourism, and some of you are here today. Lots of signatories to the Responsible Tourism Charter, and there'll be an opportunity to do that between this session and the awards later on. Subscribers to Responsible Tourism News and LinkedIn, regional networks. I didn't include, actually, when I worked this out, Tim, I didn't think to include the 40-odd companies that you have. So, 400. The 400 companies, plus all the employees at responsibletravel.com. I don't know how you work this out, but between 5 and 100,000 would be my guess. If I'm allowed that degree of opportunity. Thank you for listening.